February 1258. Smoke rolled through the streets of Baghdad before the city truly understood it was already dead. Inside his own palace, a man walked past vaults overflowing with gold, escorted not by loyal guards, but by enemies who were watching him closely. Not for resistance. For realization. This was Al-Mustasim, Caliph of Baghdad, spiritual heir to a lineage stretching back to the Prophet himself. And within hours, everything he represented would cease to exist. Baghdad was not just another city. For 5 centuries, it had been the beating heart of the Islamic world. A place where scholars from Spain to Central Asia gathered to study medicine, astronomy, mathematics, law, and philosophy. A city whose libraries contained knowledge the rest of the world would not rediscover for centuries. While Europe struggled through fragmentation, Baghdad operated as a living engine of civilization. Its population crossed 1 million. Its hospitals treated the poor for free. Its canals carried water beneath streets with engineering that stunned foreign visitors. This was not a decaying empire clinging to memory. This was a civilization still functioning at full capacity. And ruling over it was a man who believed that position alone could protect him. Before we go any further, if you want history told without comfort or myth, support the work we do here. Subscribe to the History Veil, like this video, and share it with those who believe the past should be understood, not sanitized. Because some warnings only matter if they are remembered. Al-Mustasim inherited the title of Caliph in 1242, but he also inherited a problem centuries in the making. The Abbasid Caliphate still commanded religious authority, but its political and military strength had been quietly hollowed out. Armies were composed largely of mercenaries. Governors ruled their provinces like independent kings. And although the treasury was full, it was rarely used to strengthen defenses. Baghdad had survived weakness before. It had outlasted civil wars, rival caliphs, and shifting borders. To many within the court, survival felt inevitable. Then reports arrived from the east. Entire empires were disappearing. Not defeated. Erased. Cities that resisted were emptied so completely that grass grew where streets once stood. These were not raiders seeking plunder. They were something else. A system. The Mongols. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, he did not leave chaos behind. He left structure. A military doctrine refined across decades of constant warfare, capable of adapting to deserts, mountains, frozen plains, and fortified cities alike. Conquest was no longer an event. It was a process. And one of Genghis Khan's grandsons, Hulagu Khan, was tasked with carrying that process west. In 1253, Hulagu received a single directive from the Mongol leadership. Secure submission from every power between Central Asia and the Mediterranean. Submission, not destruction. The Mongols did not seek empty land. They sought obedience. Cities that submitted early were spared. Their rulers remained in place. Their people lived. Cities that refused became lessons. Every target received the same sequence. First came messengers. 3 riders. 1 letter. The terms were always identical. Submit immediately. Pay tribute. Dismantle defenses. Send hostages, usually sons of rulers. Accept Mongol authority. Survival was guaranteed. Refusal brought no immediate threat. No anger. No retaliation. Just silence. Weeks passed. Sometimes months. Life inside the city continued. Defenders began to believe the danger had passed. And then the horizon filled with horsemen. Not in chaos. In formation. The Mongol army did not rush. It surrounded the city completely. Every road sealed. Every escape route closed. Then, in full view of the defenders, construction began. Siege engines assembled piece by piece. Engineers from China and Persia worked alongside Mongol soldiers. Trebuchets capable of hurling stones heavier than wagons were erected calmly, methodically, like craftsmen finishing a project. Then a second embassy arrived. The same letter. Word for word. This is the last chance. Most cities surrendered here. Those that didn't cease to exist. By 1257, Hulagu had already demonstrated this system across Persia. Nishapur refused and was depopulated. Merv resisted and vanished. Herat defied and became ruins. Each destroyed city became a warning etched into collective memory. Resistance did not inspire mercy. It invited annihilation. And then Hulagu turned toward Baghdad. In September 1257, Mongol envoys arrived at the caliph's court. Their letter was direct. You know what has happened to the cities of Persia. Submit. Dismantle your walls. Send your sons as hostages. Do this and Baghdad will be spared. The letter reached Al-Mustasim on a Thursday. By Friday his court was divided. His vizier, Ibn al-Alqami, urged immediate submission. He presented evidence. Empires with hundreds of thousands of soldiers had fallen. Cities with walls thicker than Baghdad's had been pulverized. These were not barbarians, he warned. They were a military system perfected over half a century. Resistance meant extinction. The military commander disagreed. The Mongols were cavalry. Steppe warriors. Baghdad's walls had never been breached. The city sat far from Mongol supply lines. A prolonged siege would weaken them. And there was something else, something unspoken but powerful. Theology. Baghdad was the seat of the Caliphate, the spiritual center of Islam. Surely God would not allow pagan horsemen to destroy the house of the Prophet's successors. Divine protection was assumed as strategy. Al-Mustasim listened. He was 54 years old. A man devoted to scholarship, accustomed to luxury, uncomfortable with military matters, deeply confident in the authority of his title. After hours of debate, he made his decision. We are the Caliphate, he said. We do not submit to threats from horsemen. The envoys were dismissed without tribute. No preparations were ordered. No walls reinforced. No armies mobilized. Baghdad continued as if refusal itself were a shield. 300 miles to the east, Hulagu's army began to move. By November 1257, Mongol scouts appeared near Baghdad. Reports reached the city. A small force. Only a few thousand horsemen. No siege engines visible. Baghdad's commander saw opportunity. If this was an advanced detachment, it could be destroyed in open battle, demonstrating strength and discouraging further advance. Al-Mustasim agreed. On November 13th, Baghdad's field army marched east. 20,000 men. The largest force the Caliphate had assembled in decades. The plan was simple. Engage the Mongols. Win decisively. Return victorious. 2 days later, the armies met. The Mongol force retreated as Baghdad's cavalry charged. Not in panic. In perfect coordination. The pursuit stretched miles. Then, from hidden gullies on both flanks, Mongol cavalry emerged. 15,000 horsemen encircled the pursuers. What followed was not a battle. It was dismantling. Composite bows fired at full gallop, punching through armor from impossible distances. Baghdad's formations collapsed. Orders were lost. By nightfall it was over. Of the 20,000 who marched out, fewer than 3,000 returned. Baghdad's field army no longer existed. And the real siege had not even begun. This was the moment Baghdad crossed from danger into inevitability. Because now, only walls stood between the city and a system that had never failed. And in the next part, those walls will be tested not by chaos, but by precision. Stay with this story. Because what comes next is not just destruction. It is demonstration. January 1258. Baghdad was no longer deciding its fate. It was waiting for it. By the time the Mongol army appeared on the horizon, the illusion of safety had collapsed. Survivors from the field battle returned with stories that spread faster than fear. Entire units erased. Commanders dead. Formations broken without resistance. What Baghdad had faced in the open field was not an army reacting to circumstances. It was a machine executing a design. When Hulagu Khan arrived, he did not rush. He completed the encirclement of the city with deliberate precision. Every gate was sealed. Every road blocked. Every escape route mapped and controlled. No one entered. No one left. The Tigris River, once Baghdad's lifeline, became another barrier under Mongol surveillance. The city was isolated not only physically but psychologically. Then the construction began. From the walls, Baghdad's defenders watched siege engines take shape in full view. There was no attempt to hide them. Chinese and Persian engineers worked openly, assembling trebuchets with mathematical accuracy. Wooden frames rose piece by piece. Counterweights were calibrated. The defenders could see exactly what was being built and could calculate exactly what it would do to their walls. This was not intimidation. It was demonstration. Days passed. Then weeks. A new Mongol embassy arrived. The tone had changed. The time for full submission had passed, the message said, but the Caliph might still preserve his own life. Open the gates. Disarm the garrison. Present yourself. Spare the population. Inside Baghdad, panic replaced debate. Ibn al-Alqami urged surrender. There was no army left. No allies coming. No miracle waiting beyond the walls. Religious scholars still invoked divine protection, but their voices no longer carried confidence. The evidence outside the city was undeniable. This enemy did not rely on chance. Al-Mustasim hesitated. 3 days passed without response. On January 29th at dawn, the trebuchets began firing. The stones did not fall randomly. They struck the same sections of wall repeatedly. Each impact weakened the structure further. Microfractures spread through stone that had stood for 5 centuries. After 8 hours, the bombardment stopped. The Mongols waited. Overnight, gravity did its work. The next day, the bombardment resumed, concentrated entirely on the compromised sections. By evening, cracks were visible from inside the city. Panic spread through the population as defenders realized the walls were failing not through brute force, but through calculation. On February 5th, the eastern wall collapsed. A section nearly 30 meters wide disintegrated. Mongol infantry moved forward. Not charging. Walking. Advancing in units, securing the breach, establishing a perimeter. Cavalry followed, sealing escape routes within the city itself. Baghdad's remaining garrison attempted to resist, but resistance was symbolic at best. By nightfall, the eastern quarter was under Mongol control. Only then did al-Musta'sim act. An envoy was sent to Hulagu's camp with a simple message. I will surrender personally. I will open the gates. Spare the city. Hulagu's reply arrived quickly. Present yourself tomorrow. Alone. The next morning, the Caliph walked out of Baghdad. He did not go alone. With him were nearly 3,000 members of the court. His sons. Ministers. Scholars. Generals. They were unarmed. Mongol guards flanked them immediately, not violently, just present. The procession moved through the camp in silence. Soldiers watched. No insults. No cheers. No anger. Observation. Hulagu received al-Musta'sim in his command tent. His first question was not ideological or religious. It was practical. Where is your treasury? The Caliph hesitated. Tribute could be offered, he said. Hulagu repeated the question. Soldiers were sent to verify the location. Hours later they returned. The vaults were opened. What they found stunned even the Mongols. Gold ingots stacked by the thousands. Silver coins in endless chests. Jewels accumulated over generations. Silks enough to clothe armies. Wealth untouched while walls crumbled and soldiers went unpaid. Hulagu ordered everything documented. Then he ordered the Caliph brought to see it. Al-Musta'sim was walked back into his city through streets already under Mongol control. Past buildings beginning to burn. Past citizens who no longer looked at him as a protector. Inside the treasury, Hulagu led him room by room. Vault by vault. They did not speak. The question did not need words. Why was this here while your city prepared for nothing? What followed was shaped by Mongol belief. One of their most important taboos held that royal blood must never touch the earth. Spilling it directly would disrupt cosmic order. Execution, therefore, required alternatives. Al-Musta'sim was wrapped tightly in a carpet. Arms bound. Legs immobilized. He was laid on the ground outside the treasury. Horses were brought forward. Led slowly. Deliberately. Repeatedly across the wrapped body. No blade was drawn. No proclamation made. When it ended, the Caliph was dead. His blood had not touched the earth. The message was complete. His sons were separated from the group. All of them were executed the same day. Some accounts say by the same method. Others say out of sight. What does not vary is the outcome. No heir survived. The Abbasid line ended there. The daughters were taken away. Their fate is recorded vaguely. Distributed. Transported east. After that day they disappear from detailed history. The 3,000 who had walked out with the Caliph were divided. Those with useful skills were identified and spared. Engineers. Physicians. Administrators. The rest were executed outside the city. 5 centuries of continuous rule ended without succession. But the city itself was not finished. And in the next part we will witness what happened when Baghdad was handed over, not to chaos, but to a system that understood exactly how terror travels farther than armies ever could. Stay with this story. Because what comes next was not destruction for its own sake. It was a warning written so clearly that it reshaped an entire world. For 13 days Baghdad ceased to be a city. It became a message. Once the Caliph was dead and the gates were fully open, Hulagu released the final phase of the system. The Mongol army did not surge forward in chaos. It divided the city into sectors. Each unit was assigned specific districts. Orders were clear. Move methodically. Identify value. Remove it. Eliminate what remained. Artisans were separated first. Metal workers. Carpenters. Engineers. Anyone whose skills could be replicated elsewhere was spared and marched out under guard. Scholars followed. Those who could read, write, calculate, or treat wounds were marked and removed. physicians, administrators, account keepers. Their lives were not spared out of mercy but utility. The Mongol Empire absorbed talent the way it absorbed territory. Everyone else was gathered outside the walls. What happened next was not random slaughter. It was systematic elimination. Entire neighborhoods were emptied in sequence. Families were processed, not encountered. Sources from different regions describe the same pattern. Units advanced block by block. When resistance appeared, it was extinguished immediately. When it didn't, it made no difference. The outcome was predetermined. The numbers vary because precision was never the goal of the record keepers. Some chronicles claim hundreds of thousands dead. Others speak of 1 million. Modern historians suggest lower figures, but even the most conservative estimates place the death toll in the tens of thousands. What matters is not the exact number. What matters is that Baghdad, once the most populous city in the Islamic world, was reduced to silence. Then came the destruction of memory. The House of Wisdom, the institution that symbolized Baghdad's intellectual dominance, was looted and burned. Manuscripts collected over centuries were thrown into the Tigris River. Accounts written later described the water darkening with ink. Whether literal or symbolic, the meaning was clear. Knowledge had been targeted alongside people. The libraries were not collateral damage. They were objectives. Mosques were damaged. Palaces were dismantled. The canal system that sustained the city's agriculture was deliberately destroyed. Not as revenge, but prevention. A city that could not feed itself could not recover quickly. Hulagu did not want Baghdad rebuilt in defiance. He wanted it remembered in ruin. On February 20, 1258, the Mongol army withdrew. They left behind survivors on purpose. Those who had been spared were allowed to return to a city that no longer functioned. Streets filled with bodies. Infrastructure shattered. Trade collapsed. Administration gone. The survivors carried stories. And those stories traveled faster than armies ever could. Within weeks, news reached Damascus. Within months, Cairo. Courts across the Middle East received the same reports. Not just that Baghdad had fallen, but how it fell. What happened to the Caliph? What happened to his sons? What happened to a city that believed itself untouchable? And something changed. Cities that had been preparing resistance reversed course. Damascus opened its gates before the Mongols arrived. Aleppo sent tribute and hostages preemptively. Smaller states submitted without seeing a single Mongol soldier. Baghdad had not merely been destroyed. It had been demonstrated. Rulers performed the same calculation. Resist and face annihilation. Submit and survive. The equation was brutally clear. The Mongol advance finally halted in 1260 at the Battle of Ain Jalut, where the Mamluks defeated a Mongol force in open combat. But even that victory was shaped by Baghdad's fall. The Mamluks did not trust walls. They did not rely on sacred authority. They built a society designed entirely around military readiness. They studied the Mongol system. They adapted to it, because they understood what Baghdad had not. This enemy could not be ignored, negotiated with casually, or waited out. Baghdad itself survived as a place but never as a center. Markets reopened. People returned. But the House of Wisdom was never rebuilt. The scholars who died were never replaced. The axis of the Islamic world shifted permanently. A civilizational momentum that had taken centuries to build ended in weeks. Yet the most enduring legacy was psychological. For generations, advisors in distant courts would invoke Baghdad when debating defiance. They did not need to describe it in detail. Everyone already knew. The image of a caliph wrapped in a carpet. A dynasty erased in a day. A city burned not out of rage but instruction. The Mongols had achieved something rare. They turned violence into communication. A single act that reshaped behavior across continents. They did not need to repeat it. Memory did the work for them. This is why what happened in February 1258 matters beyond its immediate horror. It reveals how power operates at its most efficient. Not through endless force but through example. Not through chaos but through clarity. When consequences are made unmistakable, obedience spreads faster than fear. Baghdad was not destroyed because it was weak. It was destroyed because it misunderstood the system approaching it. Titles did not negotiate with tactics. Tradition did not stop siege engines. Sacred authority did not deflect stones. When systems collide, the one that adapts survives. The one that doesn't becomes a lesson. And lessons like Baghdad echo far longer than empires. If this story unsettles you, it should. Because it is not about the Mongols alone. It is about how power signals itself. How destruction is sometimes designed not to be repeated, but remembered. How a single, calculated act can reshape the choices of millions. The men who destroyed Baghdad did not need to conquer the world to rule it. They only needed everyone to believe they could. And belief, once established, becomes a force more powerful than any army.